My old pal Doug is going to be a demonstration of what atheists do all of the time. They assume their own standard and then kick the ladder out so that nobody can use the same standard which they use to get to their particular conclusion. This is not a personal attack on any one person. This is just broadly taking down what is called a double standard. It's really silly. It's used all of the time. And the naive of our society often listen to people like this. So we're just going to play one really short clip and demonstrate how the double standard is so evident. It's right in our face. So let's begin here.
Historical evidence doesn't count. I know it's sad for you to hear this, and I know it pains you, but for guys like Aaron Ra, the historical evidence doesn't cut it. It's not sufficient. Not to say there's no evidence that Jesus existed, the man, but really you're going to say someone walked on water based on a very old text saying so? Of course not. What Aaron Ra is saying, repeatable, demonstrable evidence, scientific type evidence, is the type of evidence that would convince him and me. How many times have you heard Christians say you can't put God in a test tube? Well, this is what Aaron Ra is saying, and other people, Richard Dawkins, is saying.
Historical evidence is off the table. Our interpretation of the historical facts are off the table, right? Demonstrable, repeatable evidence. Can you cite to me a study in which we have demonstrated the origin of species? Can you cite for me a study in which we have repeated the evolution of common ancestry? Can you cite for me a study in which we have demonstrated that the Earth is billions of years old? No, of course you can't, because that's an inference made from history. And history's not telling you these things. You can look at the ice caps or the markings on side of trees, and you're going to make an inference as to what they mean. Historical evidence is valid when it's used for evolution, when it's used for wild speculation about the billions of years which existed before us. But it's not valid when there's an actual text which states eyewitness accounts of miracles which were performed and no contradicting evidence to it. No, that's not valid. That's stupid superstition. That's not a valid evidence. Why? Because it's not repeatable? Okay. Repeat a billion years. I would like to see you do it. Use your test tubes in your lab coats. Do what you can. Use your scientific magic. They assume their own standard and then kick the ladder out for anyone who would seek to use the very same standard which they came to their conclusions to demonstrate something that they don't want to believe. It pains them to acknowledge the historical evidence for Christ and the miracles which Christ performed. It pains them to acknowledge the historical evidences for the apostles in the church. And so what do? They deny history. But then if you were to cross-examine and say, doesn't history lead to many evolutionary conclusions? It would be like, well, that's valid. That's scientific. Prove it. Give me your scientific test tube. Show me evolution in a bottle, which I can observe and test. You'll never be able to do it because it's not scientific. It's an inference based on history, which, by the way, is pretty irrational. More irrational than believing in the eyewitness testimony, which is not contradicted, of a man who performed miracles and rose from the dead.